And there we go. Can you hear me, Jay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Somebody interrupted our ad, I see. Wintry greetings. Hello.
How's it going?
I am here. My name is Dr. Martin Hiesbeck. I'm the head of research at Uphold, and I'm speaking today to Jay Kurahashi-Sofue from Avalanche, Ava Labs, based in New York, I think you said, right?
Yes, correct.
Yes. Where is most of the team? If I remember, there's lots of people from Avalanche in New York, right?
There are quite a few of us here, but there's also a remote-friendly company at Ava Labs, so we have team members all across. We have some in London, actually. We have a bunch in all over Europe and Asia as well. So anywhere there's crypto professionals, seems like we have a presence.
That's the new normal now, when you go on regular calls without actually knowing where the people you work with for years are based. It's increasingly
Exactly.
so, right? COVID made that possible. I actually, my own personal history with Avalanche was interrupted by COVID. I met Aaron in 2018 or 2019, and then COVID came and nobody traveled and sort of interrupted everyone's blockchain career. But Avalanche always seemed like a very, very interesting project to me, because reason is a bit mathematical, engineering wise, but the three different chains that make up the systems I think are highly interesting. Can you, before we start looking at the year and what's coming next, can you give us a quick overview of what you think makes Avalanche special?
What makes Avalanche really special are three things, and I'll go in order in which I find them to be important. The first feature is transaction finality in under 1 second. That is an extremely important value proposition, especially if you pick the traditional finance technology stack. There is a common phrase or common terminology that's called T+2. It used to be T+3. What that effectively means is it takes 2 days after you initiate the transfer of value or the transfer of money, and it takes 2 business days for that to completely clear and actually be at the end counterparty's hands or in their custody. And so if you really think about how that works, 1 second as a value proposition versus 2 days is quite fascinating. I think the challenge that we find at Ava Labs and also just the crypto and Web3 space as a whole is a lot of the T+2 settlement, I guess, experience is not really felt by the day-to-day consumer. It's usually felt more by professionals who are moving money around, and they understand it quite well. But the end consumer actually sees instant settlement in their eyes. If you actually withdraw, $100 in cash from your ATM, for example, you're getting that instantly. But what happens is the bank is basically giving you a loan and is processing that transaction in that 2 days time frame. So that's first. Number two is transaction cost. Transaction cost is dynamic on the platform and is kept very low in the cents. And so if you can think about anytime you want to use transactions on the Avalanche platform, it just costs cents to use, and you can get that almost instantly. Last piece, which is a little bit more technical, I would say, but important, is security as it relates to how many validator nodes you can run or Avalanche can run. And so for those that don't know what validator nodes is exactly, it's really just another way to say these are the hardware effectively, or the nodes, or kind of the units that are processing the transactions on the platform. You have to have some sort of entity, hopefully in the distributed system, multiple thousands, tens of thousands of entities that are all helping to process these transactions and make sure that they're valid. If they're not, then do not process those transactions, of course. And so Avalanche, as it stands now, have about 1,400 or 1,300 validators, I think the last time I checked. And it can actually scale much higher than that. And so the central point of failure you can already see in this early stage is already quite mitigated.
To become a validator, I need to stake 2,000, I think. I
yes.
remember.
Yes. So you have to stake 2,000 AVAX token, which is the token that helps operate the platform. So you have Avalanche and then the AVAX token. And so one of the different things that people can't get their head around, even myself sometimes, is you can actually now be part of the system. If you were to pick an analogous reference to Web 2, Amazon runs AWS full stop. There's no community that actually helps run those servers. And so that's kind of the difference between the prior system and also the Web3 systems.
How does the block finality, you don't have to answer this if it would be too technical, but there are several chains that claim to have block finality, for example, Algorand. Is there anything specific about the Avalanche consensus mechanism that guarantees the block finality better than others?
Yeah, so I don't know the Algorand model too well. I think just I can comment more generally on different statements. So a lot of the layer 2 rollups effectively give you the results that you need when it comes to transactions, but the finality actually takes some time. Some of them take days actually. And so it's kind of like that banking analogy. You might actually get that instant gratification, but there might be issues on the back end as the transactions start to settle. What actually enables Avalanche to be able to accomplish all three of those value propositions, and actually more, but just those three is more importantly, is the consensus protocol. And so the consensus protocol is a brand new novel consensus protocol that has never been used ever before. And it uses a concept called subsampling effectively. Actually, for those viewers that are curious on exactly what that means, I would actually suggest we have a video on YouTube. If you type in Avalanche Consensus with one of our co-founders, Emin Gunsir, there's like a 3-minute video that really explains that pretty well. I can also kind of send it to you guys, and maybe you can distribute that as well. I tend to find it's a really good way to create an analogy of how the consensus gets reached in the system in a very exponential way. And so effectively, that's what's running the engine of the platform. And if you think about most other blockchains in the space, a lot of them actually repurpose consensus models and innovate more above that layer. And so our philosophy at Ava Labs with Avalanche, of course, is that this whole new system is built from the ground up. And that's quite a complex feat. And we're still trying to improve upon the user experience. And so people really shouldn't care about these protocols at the end of the day. They should care about the applications that sit on top of them. And if the applications and the solutions make your life easier, amazing. If not, then back to the drawing board.
One of the reasons why I follow Avalanche very closely is something we do not have the scope to discuss, but in case you are mathematically inclined as a listener, the Avalanche uses a direct acyclic graph and not a blockchain. In a sense, it is as much a blockchain as Ethereum because it's EVM compatible, and as little as a blockchain, like, for example, a hash graph or other hypergraph model, mathematically speaking. So we've had a disastrous year, not to put a finer point on it, right? We went from Bored Ape craze to Ukraine war to Luna to Celsius to he who mustn't be named. It's been a bad year. How has it been for you? How has it been for Avalanche, for your team?
Yeah, I can answer all that pretty in depth. So for me, I've been in the space working as a professional since 2015. So this is now the second biggest cycle that I've gone through as a professional. As a personal investor and trader, been in the space since 2011. So there was a bunch of other smaller cycles. Mt. Gox was the biggest one, I think, early days, and I felt like the party was completely over at that time. I didn't.
How many rug pulls did you survive? How many rug pulls?
I've actually gone through 3 in my lifetime. It has taught me.
You're proper
a lot,
bro.
Exactly. Yeah. properly evangelized in the club, I guess, or initiated in the club. I think the more serious note, though, is early days. There's obviously high risk, and there's still a lot of high risk, and so you have to be okay with that risk, and you learn a lot about the technology and what it's good for and what it's not good for, especially if you experience it yourself. So of course, I'm not suggesting that being a victim of a centralized exchange hack is something that everyone has to go through. Hopefully you can just watch on the sidelines and see the backlash, but sometimes it just takes to actually experience it yourself to really understand, hey, why does self-custody make sense? Why does pulling your funds off exchanges that are insured make sense? All these different types of kind of like I guess the best way to describe it is like crypto hygiene, I guess, or Web3 hygiene. I kind of made that term up on the spot. But in terms of the team is unaffected by, at least directly, from all these different things that have imploded. Luckily, we've been very conservative with our strategy when it comes to who we use to lend out funds. For example, I know a lot of the industry tends to get a little bit carried away, and I think that's where they got caught up in this web with all those bullet points that you basically named. And so the conviction is there. We are very determined. I think one of the things that's quite nice about a little bit more clarity and less noise is that you can actually focus a little bit better on core objectives, core niches. How do we actually move beyond things that aren't working quickly, and how do we continue to double down, triple down on things that are working? And I think because the signal is much more clear when it comes about, we can actually have a lot more conviction. And also, again, all these other companies that perhaps shouldn't necessarily make it in a I don't know, lack of a better phrase, real world context, where you're not propped up by a ton of VC money, you're not propped up by a lot of ICO money even sometimes, and even secondary trading. You let the product speak for itself. And so I think that's what the next few years are going to do. Every time these cycles happen, it happens every time. And then all of a sudden you have almost a phoenix rising out of the ashes, and all these different applications that really are useful are going to start to shine.
I mean, crypto is a godsend for all these hedge funds who suddenly don't have to obey all the regulations, all the rules, because there are no rules, right? So they did enjoy. They did have a good ride with some of the projects out there. What has technically changed at Avalanche in the last year? Any milestones, any big steps?
Yeah. So in the last year, really, it's focused on the point I mentioned earlier, which is really maximizing user experience, simplifying the process for developers, first and foremost, developers who are building solutions on Avalanche. Avalanche, like with Ethereum and other smart contracts platform, is simply just an ecosystem or a base layer to build your solutions on top of. And so what I like to describe is it's kind of like the App Store, and you have all these different solutions on it. What makes it a little bit different from an App Store is the applications that are running on top of it rely on the performance of the infrastructure. It's not like iPhone apps rely on the Apple Store to perform at all. It just exists for marketing purposes for the most part. And so when it comes to features that we've been improving on the protocol, some things that I can think of from the last year, we continue to optimize the blockchain within the Avalanche stack that has all the applications, making sure that it can run faster, cheaper, and more reliably as it continues to get more demand. That's a really important part about distributed systems. Another component, as you mentioned or alluded to, is also the DAG chain, the exchange chain, really trying to understand what people are using with that, and also, again, continuing to add performance improvements on that side. I think the next thing that people are waiting for, and so this is where a lot of the year has built up, is we have this function, subnets. Subnets are effectively a way to allow applications to have their own blockchain ecosystems, so they don't actually have to compete with other applications for resources on a monolithic blockchain or one blockchain.
Is that like the Polkadot relay chain, or?
Yeah. So other solutions are tackling this in very similar ways in terms of high level architecture. So Polkadot parachains, Cosmos is IBC. Those are kind of the ones that I have top of mind. Avalanche subnets are focusing on horizontal scalability. This idea that, again, applications deserve its own infrastructure, and sometimes it needs its own infrastructure. I think the main difference is for subnets are trying to be much more efficient when it comes to communicating across different subnets. Right now, there is no cross subnet communication. This is something that's coming soon within the next year. And so all these improvements have to actually make sure that we can get to that point. And once that's there, then you're going to have a very interoperable system within the Avalanche ecosystem. So you could effectively have subnets that scale up other blockchains. So the EVM is one implementation of the Ethereum ecosystem, of course, but there's also other ways to scale that out. And so we consider Avalanche to be potentially a blockchain of blockchains, could also have institutional deployments as well on a permission side, You can get very creative with how you customize it with compliance built in on chain or off chain. All these different automations that can really get tacked on to whatever you want in the system. Games also don't want transaction fees potentially. And so also feeless subnets could exist as well. You can kind of see where it really depends on what use case is, and that customizability is super important for applications.
So who is using it? Give us the alpha. Who are you working with, or who will be using it?
Yeah. So I'll talk about the public pieces and even the most recent pieces of who's actually using it. But you kind of have a spread of everybody at this point. It's kind of like how you describe the internet. Who's using the internet? Well, the internet is used by almost everybody, or at least 50% of the world with internet access, I guess. So that's not quite true. But in terms of profiles, it's almost everybody. You have large institutions on Avalanche. So large institutions could be like a KKR. KKR actually tokenized their feeder fund to basically create a much more efficient system to then be able to lower the barrier of entry for investors. KKR is an institution that really only services really, really ultra high net worth individuals, maybe, and then also even, of course, institutions themselves. And so the barrier to entry is quite high, and this actually lowers it to still a little bit of a high bar, but more qualified investors, which is in like the millions of dollars of investments. Other companies, Deloitte and Lemonade Insurance, they've built deployments in kind of similar use cases. Deloitte has created a much more streamlined process for disaster relief grants management, approvals, denials, checks on whether the status of grants. So there's actually one single source of truth. And then similarly, Lemonade has created a much more, I guess, accessible platform for trading insurance policies for subsistence farmers in South America. One of the biggest issues is, think about insurance policies. There's just no policy that exists that covers hundreds of dollars. They have to be thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. And so for these farmers who don't have that much yield in terms of crop and have that much value in their crops, they need a smaller solution. And those smaller solutions economically cannot exist in centralized systems because of all the overhead. And so the overhead is now removed, and you can actually have these compliance systems. So those are, or efficient systems, sorry. So those are kind of the enterprise side of things. And then there's also seeing kind of in the comments, seems like people are more into maybe like the pure Web3 side. And so there's a bunch of decentralized applications as well, specific to decentralized finance, of course, but gaming, NFT marketplaces. I think in the decentralized finance side, we have a lot of the top Ethereum applications that have moved cross-chain and work on Avalanche as well, from liquidity pools to automated market makers, decentralized exchanges, options protocols, everything in between. And then the games are really what's interesting. The games are starting to experiment with this technology, and they're using subnets to start to deploy because they need that very contained ecosystem to be able to operate their game. It doesn't make sense for a game to compete again with the resources of perhaps a financial application. So some games would be, well, Shrapnel is a first-person shooter. There's Gunzilla as well, which is first-person shooter as well. There's a lot of mobile games actually. So Castle Crush, it's kind of like a fun little game.
I was just at Decipher, Algorand Decipher, and it was 2 rooms were all about games. Completely unexpected for me. Now you are talking all about games. What is it with blockchain and games that I don't get? Am I just too old for it? Why is blockchain gaming a thing?
Yeah, so I think we're still in the early stages of gaming and blockchain, admittedly. But I think what's interesting is, here are some examples that could work in the context of games. So right now in the gaming industry, especially with some of the large franchises like Counter-Strike, which is a first-person shooting game, and also like World of Warcraft, for example, which is more of like a multiplayer game or mass multiplayer game. You have basically black markets that exist where people are actually buying and selling assets within the game, whether that's how you want to make your gun look like with like wallpaper effectively and designs.
Yes, thank you for explaining.
So that's where,
in a
like,
traditional game, if the studio goes bankrupt, all my in-game assets are lost.
Yes.
Right. In a blockchain game, I do retain some semblance of ownership. Is that the
I
difference?
don't think I don't think it's that simple yet. I think that's one of the aspirations because you have, the concept of like, well, what happens if the game goes down? Then like philosophically, what's the use of a digital gun that you hold in your wallet, right? I don't know actually. So,
This is
um,
the thing that's always bothered me about the metaverse. I would like to own a sword in the metaverse, whichever metaverse I join, right? I would
yeah,
like to be a specific avatar, and I would like to be that same personality in different metaverses. But we have absolutely no standards for that. Do we have that for gaming? Is there a cross gaming aspect that blockchain makes accessible?
not yet.
Because
I
all
think
I
that's
hear is
also another.
currencies, right? In-game currencies.
Well, in-game currency is one, and then trading in-game items another one. Another one is a little bit higher level or a little bit distant, farther away from actually being very intertwined with Web3 tech, but could be there are membership passes, and you can actually just that kind of like or use NFTs to create those experiences and to be able to embed exclusive I don't know, like releases or certain parts like that. So it all of a sudden becomes an asset. Not only does it give you access within the game, but it also gets you access to certain parts of the brand. And so I see it as a marketer, of course, I see it as a marketing tool. And that who's to say that, let's say like a battle pass from Call of Duty can't be super valuable, especially if it gets you certain access to things like that. So still, again, like these are all really like cursory pieces. It hasn't really broken in. I think the reason why everyone's very bullish on games is because it hasn't been proven out yet. The games haven't really had their NFT cycle. It hasn't had their DeFi cycle or the ICO cycle. And so it's kind of like any hype cycle happens, we're kind of in the calm before the storm, it seems.
It seemed a bit this year like every chain is trying to do everything. Uh,
Yeah.
where
Yes.
where's the Avalanche's focus? Do you have one, or are you doing everything like everybody else?
No,
I'm
no,
sure you have a focus.
thank goodness we do have a focus, because if we do everything, we also do nothing at the same time. And so the focus areas are still quite large, but I will describe them. We have 7 verticals that we focus on. 5 of them are focused on the ecosystem, so outwardly, and then 2 of them are focused on products that we have that come out of Ava Labs, the team itself. And so the first 2 products would be core. We have a wallet that works on browser extension and mobile. And so that this is just a self-custody wallet, which is full of features that really work well for today's crypto user, honestly, that wants to do all these different functions without having to go out there and look for them. Number 2 is the Avalanche platform, so that might be obvious in this discussion. And then the rest of the 5 verticals really sit on top of Avalanche, where one is focused on decentralized finance, the second is gaming, the third is NFTs, but NFTs is a large vertical. So the focus we have there is with art and creatives, not necessarily with Web3 art. We're open to that too, but really traditional artists who have really broken through their own careers in the traditional sense and really want to figure out how can we, as a collective society, use this new technology to better empower creatives themselves. We also have enterprises and institutions. So those are kind of batched together right now. They will be separated soon because they are definitely different audience segments. And then the last segment is a little bit different, where it's more focused on developers. And so developers kind of persist across all verticals. And so those are really how we're attacking the market. Can we make solutions that are useful for the developer, the builder? And also, can we make solutions that are useful for perhaps people that are tuning in, investors, traders, crypto users?
We had gaming, we had NFTs, and we had DeFi. I think we covered gaming more or less. Let's talk about NFTs and the artists for a bit.
Yeah.
Anybody we know? Any big museum? Any big collaboration coming here?
Yeah, so in terms of collaboration, we've worked with some pretty world-renowned artists, some photographers, just trying to understand what we can actually do with the tech. The next year, the next quarter or so, we're going to see a lot more efforts with those artists. One that I can name is Dave Krugman. He's an incredible partner. He has a collective called All Ships. We've been working with him to really figure out how do we cultivate this community who's interested in this technology and then actually start to deploy concepts. We don't exactly know what the deployments are just yet. They're not quite public, but look forward to some of the next few quarters, I would say, where you're going to see a huge push in this realm. And we're pretty excited about that.
Wonderful. The last item we have is DeFi. What's going on in DeFi?
Yeah. So decentralized finance, I think right now is an interesting period. A lot of the activity has stalled a little bit. What we're still looking for is getting more liquidity in the system. You just need liquidity to start to be a little bit more innovative in other realms. So I think the most recent pieces that we've been focusing on are targeting interoperability. So we've been working with Layer 0, who helps with interoperability across multiple blockchains. And so we have a wrapped Bitcoin asset that exists on Avalanche called BTC.B. This asset is basically to get Bitcoin exposure into decentralized finance apps, which can happen with other solutions as well. But this one you can actually mint and redeem without the need of a centralized intermediary. You can just freely mint and redeem these assets. So basically on demand, which is super important, I think, in this day and age, especially with volatility. And then also, I think the other side is really options protocols and just more sophisticated finance protocols. And so decentralized finance really sits kind of alongside the sophisticated finance cohort in the institutional realm.
All right. We definitely need to do more on the DeFi side and the institutional aspects. I think we have another event planned together for institutions. It's December. What are you hoping for the next year? What's coming for Avalanche in the next year, and what are you hoping for personally after this year?
I think I'm hoping for Avalanche, I'm hoping for continuing to get our stride within the ecosystem, showing people really that this is a really valuable platform to use effectively. And so I think that's where we're going to need much more incredible solutions to come into the door. And it's kind of this flywheel that we're trying to create, which everyone is trying to create, for lack of a better term. And one of the things, when you look outwards in the space, to comment on reliability, it's super important to really understand what does it mean to be reliable in the space. And it doesn't mean to be running for 1 or 2 years. We've seen time and time again that is too short of a time horizon, especially with blockchain platforms and blockchain protocols. And so what you need is a system that can hopefully last, of course, 5 years, 10 years, but even centuries. That's the whole goal as to why we're creating these public goods for the world. And so ultimately, I think the noise should die down. This is kind of segueing into more of like the ecosystem commentary. I hope that a lot of the nefarious activities, I guess, for lack of a better term, that's been happening in the background starts to get cleaned up. I think a lot of people should learn a little bit more from those mistakes, number one, but I hope also that the regulators catch up to what's happening, because the more this space continues to push through, the farther away the regulators get from the reality of this technology. And one of the things I always say is, if the regulators, at least I'm talking about US regulators because I know about them the most, but if the regulators don't understand how social media works, how can they possibly understand how Web3 works?
You
right?
were watching the Senate hearings, I hear.
Yeah.
Actually, in a preparation meeting yesterday with a lawyer, we are doing a webinar. This is a public service announcement. We have another webinar next week, 21st, with a personage of interest. No, that's wrong. Interest is when you're a suspect. A personage of importance from Washington to speak to us on regulation after FTX. That's next week. But yeah, the current situation is as bad as can get, because the regulators now feel vindicated in cracking down and just pointing the finger and saying all this crypto stuff, we told you so, it's bad, right?
Yeah, exactly.
This will take a while to digest.
I agree. I mean, I think hopefully it'll be short term, like at the end of the day, there's so much going in the world that's perhaps a little bit more pressing than crypto sometimes, more like some of the things that you were talking about in terms of conflict and everything else. But yeah, at the end of the day, I would hope that more clarity then leads to a little bit more stable future. And as more people adopt this technology, it will kind of iron out the volatility naturally. But until then, I think we're going to see a little bit of a bumpy ride, which is part of new markets. I think other markets are going to see that as well.
To answer 2 questions from the audience, you cannot send and withdraw Avalanche tokens on Uphold yet. a little bit of a Christmas surprise coming there. Not to put the final point on it. I'm not giving deadlines, but we are working on it. It will be here soon. Also, maybe we're gonna run some validator stuff. We're trying. Avalanche has been one of the most interesting projects that I unfortunately never got involved too much. Even though I remember Arim saying to me way back at a conference, he said, we're the first real Ethereum competitor. At least you are still around without scandal, right? So many others come and gone,
Yes.
and nobody remembers their name. But Avalanche is still here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jay. Thanks for speaking to me. Thank you for speaking to our Uphold friends. And we will be in touch also about the artists. I have a project with a museum in London I'd like to talk to you about.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. I'm always thank you for coming on the show, but I'm not Oprah. You know? Thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you for having me.
If I don't see you before that, have a wonderful holidays. Bye-bye.
You too.